I am proud to join you from my clinic location, Complex Injury Rehab. We have partnered with BIS for the past couple of years to deliver this concussion series. This year, obviously, a little bit different, being a webinar as opposed to in person, but we're happy to present nonetheless. So this is week 3 in a 4-week series. I did present on the first week, which I believe was November 2nd, and that webinar was on Concussion 101, essentially all the basics of a concussion. That was recorded and is available on the BIST website or the BIST YouTube channel. So if you want to check that out, some good information out there. Last week was a colleague of mine, Colleen, a social worker who presented, also recorded and should be up shortly to revisit. Tonight is, like I said, the 3rd session, and we're going to have a look at concussions and nutrition and concussions and physical activity. Okay, so hopefully we can give you some more information on some of those topics and how they may affect you and how you can maybe use some information there for your benefit. So just as a brief background, actually I'll share my screen here. So we're going to start with nutrition and concussion. Just as a brief background on myself, like I said, my name is Shawn. I am a chiropractor practicing out of our Pickering location. I've taken some additional training on concussion management. I also provide medical acupuncture, and I actually have just recently started my master's in rehabilitation sciences as well. So trying to educate myself as much as I can on the concussion world, because it is a very fast and fluid one. Lots of research coming out every day, and that helps to guide a lot of our decision-making clinically. Just as a preface, the information tonight is not meant to be any assessment in any way or treatment in any way. It is basically just information. Okay, it may apply to you, it may not. I can't give you any sort of specifics without doing an actual assessment so that I know what's going on with your case, because everybody experiences these injuries in a far different manner than everyone else. I myself have had a few different concussions from being a rugby player growing up, and so I know the way that I experienced them was far different than some of the patients I see and some of friends and family of mine as well. So this is purely informational, not meant to be diagnostic or treatment focused in any way. Okay. I should also say that there are a couple of options as far as questions. I'll take some questions at the end. Either type them in the chat there, or there is a Q&A box that you can also type them in there, and then I'll try to answer them to the best of my abilities. Okay, so we'll get started here. So nutrition and concussion. So we're going to talk a little bit about medication to start. I do want to preface this, that medication is not within my scope of practice as a chiropractor. I cannot prescribe medication, but I can comment on it because it is a reality for a lot of patients, and I have done obviously some schooling and have some knowledge on medication. So medications, I like to say to many of my patients, have a time and a place. I do think that they play a very important role in many different disease or injury recoveries. But I do prefer, and I would recommend, that patients try to limit the use of them and that we exhaust conservative measures either before or in addition to using medications. Typically, medications will treat signs and symptoms and not the actual root cause. So if we think about an anti-inflammatory or a muscle relaxant, which are often given to not only concussion patients, but a lot of other injuries as well. They will help to decrease inflammation. They will help to relax muscles, decrease tension in muscles. But are they actually treating the cause of the injury? Most likely not. Most likely those are side effects of the injury incurred. So while they are important and play a critical role in recovery, they don't actually treat the cause. The other thing to consider with medications is the side effects of medications, right? Any sort of medication will have a side effect. And it's important to be aware of them and recognize that these medications do have effects other than what is intended. So, weighing the pros and the cons of taking medications is obviously a very crucial aspect as well. Dependency has been getting a lot of publicity in the news as well in the last few years. There has been, the opioid crisis that everybody has, I'm sure, is well aware of. Dependency on medication is something that we obviously want to avoid. So we don't want to become reliant on these medications, because a lot of these medications are intended to be short-term use, barring obviously any sort of long-term condition or neurodegenerative disease or anything like that. But medications are intended for short-term use. So if we become reliant to the point where we need them daily and we keep re-upping our prescriptions, then not only will that not be treating the cause, and we may be subject to side effects, but also we can develop other conditions. I mean, most commonly something like an ulcer. Everybody's, I'm sure, has heard of people having dependency on medications and developing an ulcer, or even long-term liver effects with certain medications. So just important not to become totally dependent on something like that. And then the cost of medication, of course, is also something to consider. So people that don't have any health insurance and for medications that aren't covered, there is a financial cost as well. So that also will play a role in the cost benefit analysis that should be done with any sort of medication being taken. Just as an example, something that I see very commonly in practice is the medication gabapentin. Okay, so this hypothetical patient has suffered a concussion. They do the right thing and they go to their family practitioner, their medical doctor. The doctor does their examination and then prescribes them this medication, which is gabapentin is an anticonvulsant, and it's usually prescribed for what people term as nerve pain, or pain that may be from the nervous system in origin. Can it help? Sure, it can help decrease pain. It can help decrease some of the symptoms that you feel with a concussion. But these side effects, if we take a look at them, dizziness, drowsiness, loss of coordination, blurred double vision, they sound pretty familiar, right? They sound like some of the effects that people experience or symptoms that people experience when they have suffered a concussion. So we get to the point where we're taking this gabapentin, maybe we have a reduction in some of the general pain we feel, but now we're starting to experience worsening dizziness or drowsiness. And now we're not sure whether, it is as a result of taking the gabapentin or potentially worsening of the actual injury incurred. So I think, like I said, they have their time and place, but we have to be a little bit more cognizant of some of these side effects and really decide whether these medications are something that we should and want to be taking as well. Again, out of my scope of practice, so something to discuss with your family practitioner. The pharmaceutical cascade is something that I also wanted to bring up, and that's, again, relating back to side effects. So this is where we take medication A and we start to experience some side effects related to that medication. And so we go and see our family practitioner again, and they give us another medication that can help with the side effects from medication A. So we take medication B now, in addition to medication A. Other side effects happen. We see our practitioner, maybe another medication is prescribed. So now you can see where I'm going with this. A lot of the side effects that we're experiencing from the initial medication taking are now being covered up or masked by other medications. And then if, like a lot of patients, we're not 100% sure on what we're taking, why we're taking it, the dosage, how often we should be taking it, we almost just re-up our prescriptions, and we fall into this cascade or this cycle of taking these medications. And, after a while, you don't even know what you're taking them for anymore. This happens very, very commonly. And you may think, oh, it may not happen. That would never happen to me. And sure, but it is a very common thing that we see in practice. And, patients end up being on a prescription for 10, 15 years, and they often are not even sure what they're taking it for. It's just that they've always done it. And so Again, it's just very important to do that cost benefit analysis that I have there in the last bullet there, just to be more aware of what you're taking and why you're taking it. So alternative interventions. So this is where I want to talk about nutrition a little bit. This is not to replace medications that are prescribed, but these are other avenues of intervention, and typically they have minimal risk. Okay. Now there is still some risk, as there is risk with any sort of intervention, but they typically will have lower risk than some of the pharmaceutical interventions, because nutrition is essentially, medicine with food, right? And Hippocrates says it best there in that quote: "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." So nutrition is the foundation of health, essentially, right? Whatever fuel we put into our body, that forms the building blocks for many of the cellular processes that we deal with every day, every hour, minute, second. So we can use nutrition to provide our bodies with the best sort of fuel, the best building blocks, so that it can work to recover after a concussion. Supplementation is a little bit different. That's providing additional exogenous resources for the body to use, which basically is providing more resources from without the body to use for their building blocks. Okay. So for example, nutrition would be something like a well-balanced diet. Supplementation would be taking additional multivitamins or fish oils in order to supplement that diet. There has been minimal research about nutrition and supplementation specific to concussions. Okay. Now this may have changed in the last year and a half, but especially because there is a influx of concussion research on the way. But there has been no large studies dedicated specifically to concussions and nutrition. Okay. There is, however, substantial research on other neurodegenerative conditions, and we can kind of piggyback on those, and we can make some inferences from those research studies, which can give us some direction on where we go with a concussion. Again, I love this cost-benefit analysis term, but really that's what it comes down to. So we have to look and weigh the costs and the benefits between these alternative interventions as well. So the side effects. Like I said, there are side effects or there is risk with anything, but typically they are very low. Okay. So like the second point says, they're mostly high potential for positive outcomes with minimal negative outcomes. Okay. There are other potential positive effects as well. Improving your health in general will go a long way to building an optimal lifestyle and optimal conditions for your body to recover. So we're going to get into a little bit more of a specific study, but first off, I want to just give you guys some of the basic principles that we want to do, not only when we're eating and paying attention to nutrition and diet with a concussion, but really this can go a long way for any sort of injury, any sort of condition, and really just kind of our everyday lives as well. These are basic principles, and I believe there's 5 of them that it's important to know and understand, and this can go a long way to improving your general health as well. Okay, so number 1, limit inflammation. So any sort of injury will typically lead to an inflammatory response. Okay, you stub your toe, it's going to get red, hot, it may bleed, it may swell. That is an example of an inflammatory response. Okay, that's a very apparent one because you can actually see it. If you were in attendance for the first lecture that I gave, one of the theories of post-concussion syndrome is actually this cyclical inflammatory response. Okay, so you can see there injury to microglia. Microglia are a type of brain cell that causes inflammation of inflammatory cytokines and cytotoxins, which are just neurochemicals. That increases the amount of stress on some of the other structures in the brain, leads to inflammation, which again causes injury to microglia, and so on and so on. Okay, so a basic principle of nutrition is that we want to limit the amount of inflammation that we have systemically, because that can help to support us in recovery. Number 2 is correcting any sort of deficiencies. Okay, so minerals and vitamins are functional resources, or like I said earlier, the building blocks that our body uses for many of the cellular processes. So if we are lacking in any minerals or vitamins, we will be having a tough time to perform these processes. And so we may perform them to a lesser degree, less than optimal degree, in an inefficient way, or we may not even do them at all. So it's important that, you know, if we are deficient in any sort of minerals or vitamins, that we do aim to correct those. Antioxidants are also a very positive and helpful thing to take or to supplement with. They protect us against ROS, or reactive oxidative species. These are things that can help, or sorry, ROS are things that can work to break down or cause stress on a lot of the structures in our body, not specific just to the brain, kind of in general as well. So that's why antioxidants, things such as cranberries or blueberries, are a great thing to supplement with, or to help to eat as well. Omega-3s, lots of really good research on omega-3s from a brain and cognitive perspective, but also just from a general health perspective. They have neuroprotective mechanisms, so they help to protect against neurological injury. So that is something that we can look at. Omega-3s most commonly found in things like fish oils or fish. Number 3 is limit food allergens. So one thing I just wanted to bring up was the difference between an allergen and a sensitivity. So an allergen is something that, yes, you can go get tested for. And many people, for example, in the food world, have found that they've been diagnosed as celiac or celiac disease, have celiac disease, which is basically an allergy to wheat. So that's fine. You know, they can help to, or they would essentially try to avoid or limit the amount of wheat that they're eating. So that is an outright test for an allergen. But a sensitivity is kind of a subclinical finding. So it can be something that doesn't actually register as being an outright allergy, but you may find that, you know, maybe doesn't agree with you, or you might find that after eating a certain food that, oh, you know, I don't feel that great. I feel a little bit foggy, or, you know, I feel fatigued. Now that wouldn't register on an actual allergy test, but it is a subclinical finding that can also affect the way that you're feeling. And these allergens and the sensitivity to a degree can promote inflammation in your gut or your intestinal system, which can then lead to you know, systemic inflammation, which is, again, brings us back to number 1 there. So we want to limit the food allergens as much as we can. Number 4 is limit simple sugars and refined carbohydrates. So these things, for example, would be, you know, white sugars, any sort of white breads, rices, that kind of thing. They can, and I should say white rice, sorry, they can suppress the immune system by causing an increase in the ROS, or the reactive oxidative species that we talked about earlier. And they can also work to cause an increase in inflammation in the gut, which again would cause a systemic inflammation. And then number 5 is promoting gut and intestinal health. So I keep saying this word gut. So it's our intestinal system, essentially, our enteric nervous system, which has been deemed the second brain. If we looked at the nervous system connection and the connection between the brain in our head and our intestinal system, there is a high degree of connectivity. And that's why it has been termed the second brain. It has a huge effect on the way that our body takes nutrients from foods, and how efficient it is in doing so. So any sort of gut health promotion is very important for just general health. Things like probiotics, which have become very popular in recent years, help with digestion and help to aid in the ability to absorb nutrients from foods as well. okay? And again, that last point there, gut inflammation can lead to systemic inflammation, which I've touched on a number of points there. So if we can decrease the amount of inflammation in our gut or in our intestinal system, that can decrease the systemic inflammation overall, which again can help us to recover from any sort of injury we're dealing with, especially a concussion. Okay, so I'm going to get into a bit of a specific study here. Like I said, no specific diet studied with concussions in humans yet. There may have been differences in the last year and a half or so, but up to the point of this PowerPoint, there hasn't been any studied. So we're going to look at something that relates, but isn't exactly a concussion. As always, we have to consider the starting point of any patient, and we have to look at their metabolic state. So if you have somebody who's already operating at a high level with respect to diet, eats very well, supplements what they need to follow those basic principles that I highlighted there, they typically would have a easier time in recovery just because they're starting from such a height. Alternatively, if we have somebody who eats a ton of refined foods, does not pay attention to their diet at all, they typically would have a little bit of a tougher time in recovery. Okay, not always, this isn't a hard and fast rule, but this is the general trend that we see. So we're going to look at something called the MIND diet, and MIND stands for Mediterranean Intervention for Neurocognitive Delay. Okay, this was actually a huge study, a very large scale study done for Alzheimer's patients. Okay, and not to say that Alzheimer's and concussion are the same thing, but there are some similarities between the two. And this is not, I should say, not acute concussion, more of the post-concussive syndrome, okay? There are similar presentations as far as cognitive delay, some of the balance coordination issues as well that is seen, the fatigue. So not that they have, outright similarities in pathophysiology, but there are some small similarities between the two, okay? Or how the two diseases or issues can relate. So the MIND diet combines the Mediterranean diet, which had a hugely popular following, for the past probably 25 years or so, and the DASH, which is the dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And these were the two diets studied. They combined them a little bit, and they looked at how they affected how they related to patients with Alzheimer's. So we're going to go over what the diet encourages and discourages. Okay, so for foods that are encouraged, I'm not going to get into specifics, but there are some examples for each category. The other thing I should say is, yes, you can rewatch this webinar if you do like this information. Alternatively, what I'll do is I can send this information through a text document to BIST, and whoever would like it, they can email it out to you guys. Okay, so sorry, encourages the consumption of the following. So number one, green leafy vegetables, right? All our dark greens that we have been told to eat in the past. Spinaches, kales, Swiss chards, salads, typically not things like iceberg lettuce, just because it is, a high percentage of water and the nutritional density is fairly low. All other vegetables, non-starch based, so non-potato based. Cassava, like different things like that. It gives you the servings there. Berries, so this goes back to the antioxidants and the reactive oxygen species. So strawberries, blueberries, blackberries, raspberries. Nuts, a variety of types, right? Everybody has kind of been told to eat the almonds. Almonds are great. There's a lot of other various nuts that have great cognitive benefits. Brazil nuts are a huge one. They're big nuts, but also they have a lot of backing from a research perspective as far as having positive cognitive effects. And olive oil. So using olive oil in place of other types of oils, some of the saturated fats in certain oils, such as vegetable or canola, it would be better to replace those with things like olive oil. And this again follows that Mediterranean diet influence there. Also encourages whole grains as opposed to the simple or refined grains. So whole wheat oatmeals, quinoas, brown rice or pastas, right? We're trying to avoid the white sugars, the white refined carbohydrates such as white rice, white breads. Fish, and this is something that just our North American diet does not eat enough of, just because of, I think, doesn't eat enough of in comparison to the Mediterranean diet, because they obviously have a little bit easier time accessing it. And those are fatty fishes. So things like salmons, sardines are fantastic, trout, tuna, mackerel. These are all high in omega-3s. And omega-3s have, like I said, a very substantial cognitive effect, but also a whole health effect as well. Beans, including, certain types of beans, but lentils and soybeans as well. Poultries, so chickens or turkeys. So you can tell these are a little bit of the leaner meats, the lighter meats. And wine. Lots of people are happy to see this, but red wine over white wine, and this is because of the nutrient called resveratrol in it, which has again been shown to have positive cognitive effects. Okay, so this is a list of the types of foods or food categories that are encouraged. Being mindful that, if a patient has other types of comorbidities, diabetes, cardiac disease, high cholesterol, whatever it may be, we have to be mindful of those issues as well. And we can't just take this diet as gospel, right? We have to incorporate what works for us individually. And that's what I said at the beginning. This can't just be a blanket, treatment plan for everybody. We have to consider the patient, each unique patient. Okay, and now we'll look at what it discourages or encourages the avoidance of. Okay, and this is all the fun stuff out there. So butter and margarine, this is a bit of a debatable one, because there are some good benefits to certain types of butter, namely the grass-fed butter that has become popular over the last couple of years. But margarine, if we can avoid that, that would be ideal, and replacing it with something a little bit better. Again, things like olive oil or high quality grass-fed butters. Cheese, which is something that I have a tough time with because I'm a cheese fanatic here. So trying to limit the amount of cheese that you're eating weekly. Red meats, so beef, pork again is a bit of a debatable one, just because it can be looked at as leaner, but lamb as well. Trying to eat that lighter meat, and also, hopefully eating a little bit more fish. And fried foods, pastries, sweets, we'll put those all together because these are pretty discouraged. Obviously high in refined sugars. Fried foods, especially the frying process, denatures certain proteins in what we're eating. And so they are not the best for you. Having pastries, sweets will cause an insulin spike in your blood as well. So not only is that detrimental from a diabetic point of view, but also that can serve to cause increased systemic inflammation as well. So just as an overview, the foods that are encouraged are typically antioxidants. So again, those are your berries. Foods that take longer to digest, okay? And this is where the whole wheat foods, the whole wheat breads, the rices, the quinoa, they come into play. Typically, they don't cause as much of an insulin spike, and they keep the insulin sensitivity of our body. Foods that are high in omega-3s, like we have right there in that picture, fatty fishes, avocados, olive oils, certain nuts. These are all typically high nutrient calorie ratio of foods. So we're getting the most bang for our buck. High nutrients with low calorie foods. Calories, we're not too concerned with, again, just from a general perspective, but we want them to be nutrient dense. And then wine, again, is from that resveratrol, which is anti-cognitive delay effects. Okay, so it can help with our cognition. Foods that are discouraged are those ones that are high in trans or saturated fats. Okay, typically things like fried foods. Foods that promote inflammation, those sweets. And also ones that are short on digestion time. So things that are inner body and outer body very quickly, they cause that huge insulin spike that can be shown with things like sugars, white sugars. So benefits that were found in that mind diet study, a memory enhancing effect, which is, something that is much needed in any sort of PCS or post-concussion syndrome patients. Decreasing of systemic inflammation, which is awesome as well. We spoke about gut health earlier. It improves insulin sensitivity. So it makes sure that the insulin in our body and the effectiveness of the insulin is still high. When we have high insulin sensitivity, this also has been shown to have a neuroprotective effect. So it helps to protect the nervous system and doesn't allow for the same type of neurodegenerative conditions to show up. It also increases neurotrophic factors, okay? And BDNF and IGF-1 are two of these factors that I want you to remember, because we're going to talk about those in physical activity as well. So BDNF stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and IGF-1 stands for insulin-like growth factor. So these are two neurochemicals basically that are elicited from our bodies that help to build and repair nervous systems or neurons, right? Which is essentially what we want from an Alzheimer's perspective, which was shown through the study, but also from a concussion, post-concussive syndrome perspective as well. If there is injury to the neurons, like we looked at in webinar number 1, then anything we can do to promote their growth and repair is going to be optimal for recovery. And obviously this diet has been shown for that. So that's a very positive effect. This one to a lesser extent, but it promotes ketosis, using ketones as a fuel source in our body. Many people have heard about things like the keto diet or different diets that serve to limit carbohydrates and high protein. From this perspective, if we use ketones, the mitochondria in our cells, which are kind of energy production units, it improves their function, and that will in turn increase our energy output. So that can be something, but it's not a direct benefit that I would see. Following the mind diet to a degree also has shown to be beneficial. So this is huge. So I just gave you, 19 different aspects of the mind diet, which can be overwhelming, right? And it can be, maybe you might find it tough to put in practice. But even if we don't follow it 100%, and we only follow it, say, 40%, 50%, 60%, whatever it may be, benefit has still been shown to be found. So you can still just follow certain aspects of the mind diet and you can still benefit from it, which is awesome, I think. These next few slides are a little bit about supplementation and specific supplements. And I'm not going to get too far into them just because they can get wordy. This is, again, something that I can send to BIST and they can email out, but we'll just briefly touch on these. So fish oil, there's two types of acids that are typically within fish oil, DHA and EPA, okay? You can see some of the effects there. Influences fluidity of membranes. Mainly the ones that we want to look at are an anti-inflammatory effect, again, getting back to that gut health and systemic inflammation. Promotes BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is awesome, again, for recovery and repair of neuronal damage. It helps to improve cognition. It reduces neural swelling and edema, which is, again, great from a recovery point of view. Promotes dendrite growth. Dendrites are a aspect of a neuron or a brain cell. So if we can improve the growth and repair of the dendrites specifically on a neuron, that again improves communication within our brain, which can help with things like cognition and many of the other functions that we may be feeling have been affected by an injury. And then the last thing I just want to touch on here quickly is omega-3, omega-6 balance. So we're very much in a more is better society, and a lot of people think, oh, if I have more of something, it's most likely better. So oftentimes when you go to a health food store or Shoppers or a Rexall, whatever, you'll find a supplement and you'll see an omega-3, you'll see an omega-3 and 6, and then you'll see an omega-3, 6, and 9. Okay. Typically our diets in the Western world are very high in omega-6s and not as high in omega-3s. So we want to balance that out. Okay, it's not that we want to completely cut omega-6s, it's that we want to balance the ratio of 3 to 6. So if our diets are already high in the 6s, there's no need to supplement with them. So typically what I would recommend patients is just to focus on the omega-3 supplements. These are a couple of other ones that have some research back into them. Again, I'm not going to get too specific into them. Creatine is typically found as a supplement in bodybuilding, working out to improve muscle mass. It can facilitate certain energy recycling of the body, improve mitochondrial function, which is our cellular powerhouse again. So that supplementation with that may improve energy production. Curcumin and turmeric are natural anti-inflammatories that we can use to decrease general and systemic inflammation. Magnesium plays a role in nerve transduction and energy production as well, and it can also help with muscular health. Melatonin is something else that concussion patients often will take to help from a sleep perspective. Patients often report having restless sleeps or not being able to fall asleep. So melatonin is something that we naturally secrete, and you can supplement with it to a degree, and that can help regulate sleep rhythms. Vitamin D and E are antioxidants as well, and also have positive effects on cognition. And then glutathione is a natural occurring antioxidant, and it can help with neuroregeneration, or basically helping to repair and stimulating growth of neuronal structures as well. So I know that was a kind of a rapid fire through the last little bit there, but that's the major takeaway I want you to have from that are those basic principles, because following specific diets, yes, it can be beneficial. Following the MIND diet can be beneficial, but sometimes the feedback is that they're restrictive and it's difficult to actually put into practice. If you just follow those main principles that we spoke about there, that is a great starting point and gives you a pretty good platform to jump off of into the nutritional world. Okay, supplementation, I would say it's important to know what you need, and you get to that point by going to a healthcare practitioner, naturopath, dietitian. Certain physiotherapists, chiropractors can be well versed in it, and also your medical doctor to a degree if they've done some additional work and additional training in that world. It's best to seek out the help of a qualified practitioner before making any substantial changes to diet or supplementation, especially if you are currently on medication as well, because sometimes they can have interrelated effects there. Okay, so I see there's a few questions. Typically what happens when I take questions is that it'll spur other questions. So I'm actually going to wait till the end for all questions. Okay, so I'm going to actually, it is now 6:43. We're going to take 2 minutes for a break. I'm just going to grab a little bit of water. I will be right back, and we'll get started on the second segment, and then we'll take all questions at the end. Okay. Okay, so I'm just gonna swap to my other presentation. Sorry. Okay, and this is coming up as physical activity and concussions. Is that correct? I just want to make sure before I get started. Somebody can, perfect, thank you. Okay, so sorry, I'm just having a little bit of trouble. There we go. Physical activity and concussions. So this is something that I love to talk about just because I think physical activity can be hugely beneficial in the recovery of a concussion and also in post-concussive syndrome. Okay, and we'll look to see how that's the case. So physical activity in general, we'll just talk briefly about that. I think everybody knows that physical activity is a beneficial exercise to undertake. Let's look at a few ways how. So exercise causes a neurochemical release, okay? Most people have heard of things like endorphins. There's another subgroup called enkephalins. These are some of the good, feel-good neurochemicals that are often spoken about with physical activity. People may have heard of something called a runner's high, or people claiming that they feel amazing after a run. They almost have this sensation of feeling, light on their feet and, very sharp cognitively and whatever it may be. Exercise can cause the release of these neurochemicals. So it can help from a feel-good perspective. They also can help from a physical perspective as well, these chemicals, okay? Physical activity can also help from a physical well-being point of view. So obviously with more activity, we improve our body composition. And sure, from an aesthetic point of view, this may be something that some people want, but body composition, improving muscular mass and decreasing fat tissue also will have benefits from wear and tear perspective on our bodies, and also some of the other comorbidities that we may experience in life. So it can help from a cardiac health point of view or a heart health point of view. It can help from an osteopathic point of view or bone health point of view, right? What's one of the main things that we recommend for people with brittle bones or osteoporosis? It's to do, resistive exercise, because bones will actually respond to the loading patterns and will improve in strength, right? It can help from lifestyle disease prevention, something like diabetes, right? Specific types of diabetes, obviously. If we exercise and we eat well, you can prevent certain types of these lifestyle diseases. Physical activity also helps from an energy and fatigue point of view, right? It almost seems counterintuitive for some people where, if I exercise more, I'm going to be more tired. But you get to the point where when you exercise more, your body becomes more efficient at producing and using the energy. And so then we are actually left with an excess energy store. So it can help from that perspective. And psychological and emotional well-being as well, which is a huge part of health, right? People use physical activity as a stress or anxiety relief, right? It's a nice time to throw your headphones in, go for a run, go for a walk, do some weightlifting, whatever, do some yoga, whatever it may be, and kind of escape from things that are causing stress or anxiety, right? It can also help with hormonal and neurochemical regulation. So you can have expression of things like testosterone or different growth hormone, different hormones that can help to regulate us from a physical point of view, but also psychological and mental health perspective as well. The other thing is, it builds confidence in our ability to do certain things. It's fun, helps us to relax, helps us to sleep. And generally, there are high levels of increased quality of life with being physically active as well. Just like anything, though, there are cons to all these benefits that we've listed. So there's potential for injury, of course, if you are trying to lift too much, run too far, maybe you slip and roll your ankle off the sidewalk. So there is always a potential for injury, of course, like with any activity. Time and money, right? These are the big ones that people often state why they can't do or don't want to do physical activity. Time, I understand, there's only 24 hours in a day, but we can often carve out something even like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, right? It doesn't have to be these huge 1.5 to 2 hour workouts. Even just short duration, short bursts will be beneficial. And cost. I think people have become a little bit more, have become better with this over COVID. And that's because, gyms are closed. And so we're a little bit more ingenuitive. We don't need all of the weights and machines that are at a gym. Really all we need is our body weight and some space, right? And you can find a way to mix in a workout. So lots of benefits and a few cons. So physical activity in the concussion world is typically used in 3 different ways. So from an assessment point of view, so when a person has a concussion and is being seen by a healthcare practitioner, they can use physical activity as an assessment. And we'll talk about that. From a treatment perspective, okay, so physical activity can be prescribed to a patient so that they can realize all the benefits from above. And then also we can use physical activity in a return to work, return to learn, and return to play protocol, okay? There's these graded protocols to ensure that patients who have suffered a concussion or post-concussive syndrome can return to work, return to school, return to their sport in a very safe way. And oftentimes physical activity is a component of that. So again, if you were in attendance for the first webinar, I spoke about this group, the CISG, which is the Concussion in Sport group. They are a consensus group of all the world's top concussion experts. They come together every 4 years and they bring together all their research, they have a chat, and they come up with these different consensus statements. So the last one was done in 2016 in Berlin and was published in 2017. And so we should be having a new updated version in the short term, but this is where I like to fall back on because again, this is the consensus from all the experts in the world. So in their document, the following 2 statements can be found. So at a minimum, the assessment should include a comprehensive history, focused physical examination, and special tests where indicated. For example, graded aerobic exercise tests. Okay, so anytime a patient comes into an office with a concussion or post-concussive syndrome, at a minimum, the assessment done by the healthcare practitioner should have a comprehensive history, so a detailed discussion about what happened and what has since happened since the injury, a focused physical examination, which may include orthopedic testing, palpation of certain structures, okay, and different special tests where indicated, which includes something like a graded aerobic exercise test. And we're going to talk about one of those specifically in just a short bit. There is also preliminary evidence supporting the use of an individualized symptom-limited aerobic exercise program in patients with persistent post-concussive symptoms associated with autonomic instability or physical deconditioning. Okay, so an individualized symptom-limited aerobic exercise program. Okay, so this should be specific to the patient. Okay, it's not a blanket statement, blanket treatment for everybody. It's specific to the patient. It's aerobic exercise, so it's challenging the cardiovascular system in patients with persistent post-concussive symptoms. Okay, so with PCS. And also the second bullet there, a targeted physical therapy program in patients with cervical spine or vestibular dysfunction. So physical therapy program, meaning rehabilitation in patients with cervical spine or neck or vestibular dysfunction, the system in our body that governs things like balance and coordination. Okay, so these experts are all advocating for physical activity to be used in the assessment and also physical activity and rehabilitation to be used in the treatment. So let's talk about how we can do that. So for the assessment, it will differ in an acute patient versus a chronic patient. Okay, so one of the tests you can see at the bottom there that we use is the Buffalo Concussion Treadmill test. And in an acute patient that suffered their injury today or yesterday or within 2 days, we wouldn't put them on the treadmill right away, and that's because they're still experiencing the very acute phases of that of that injury. However, in a patient in the chronic phase, typically we look at that as being anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks and above. For sure, we would want to do this graded aerobic exercise test. Okay, and the one that is gaining in popularity is the Buffalo Concussion Treadmill test. It was actually just picked up by the WSIB, or the Workplace Safety Insurance Board, as well. So it is gaining a little bit more notoriety. Okay, so that's how we can use it in the chronic setting. Any sort of assessment should be started with ruling out any sort of more sinister pathologies, okay, which would involve things like neurological testing, reflexes, strength testing, special tests as well. And once those are ruled out, then you can move forward, okay? So one of the theories of PCS, or post-concussive syndrome, is a cerebral vascular origin, meaning brain blood flow origin. So again, back to webinar number 1, there's a study that was done in rat models. So take it with a grain of salt as far as how much we can infer with humans, but still it was shown that concussive injuries cause up to a 50% reduction in the brain blood flow of rats. Okay, so I'm not saying it's the same number in humans, but there is most likely comparable numbers, probably to a lesser extent, but comparable factors to this study. So this is why we use the graded aerobic exercise testing. And this is a test that was put together by the University of Buffalo and is used pretty widely around the world now. Some of you may have had the treadmill test done. There is also an alternative for those patients that don't feel comfortable on a treadmill, and that's done on a bike, and it can be just as effective. But basically, this test is done at the chronic stage, and like I said, from 2 to 4 weeks and up post-injury. Okay, the protocol is, the protocol is essentially this. We put a heart rate monitor on the patient, and we monitor their heart rate throughout the entire time. The treadmill stays the same speed at 3.3 miles per hour, which is judged to be a natural walking speed. Okay, we can always modify it if we need to, but ideally that's where we are. From that point, every minute, the incline on the treadmill is put up 1 percentage point. Okay, and at every minute, we judge how the patient is doing from a perceived exertion point of view, symptom presentation point of view, and also from their heart rate. Okay, so what this allows us to do is, yes, it can assess whether there is a cerebral vascular component or a brain blood flow component in this patient's post-concussive syndrome. But it also allows us to base treatment off of the findings. So, for example, if we found that a patient was able to get their heart rate up to about 150 beats per minute, at that point, they started to experience symptoms. We know that is their symptom threshold. Excuse me. 150 beats per minute is their symptom threshold. So we can use that number in order to prescribe physical activity. So we're going to say this. We don't want you to exercise up to the point of symptoms. We don't want you to exacerbate those symptoms. We want you to exercise just under so you can receive the benefits of physical activity, which we'll talk about in a minute, but not cause a huge flare-up in symptoms. So we take that 150 number, 150 beats per minute, where the symptom threshold was, and we take 80% of that, which ends up being 120 beats per minute. And we say, look, we want you to exercise at this level, okay? Because we know it's below symptom threshold, so you shouldn't feel any of the dizziness, the nausea, the lightheadedness, whatever it may be, and you can still reap the benefits of being physically active. So what are those benefits? So we can look here. There was a study done in 2018 in the Clinical Journal of Sports Medicine. And this is, again, reinforcing what we just spoke about. So early sub-threshold aerobic exercise, so we're not going high enough that we exacerbate symptoms, prescribed within 1 week of sports-related concussion can quicken recovery. A lot of people think that may be too soon, but the research is pointing in the direction of it being beneficial. So this is even sooner than the 2 to 4 weeks that we spoke of. It helps to normalize cerebral vascular physiological dysfunction. Basically, it helps to improve the brain blood flow. Okay, and then the benefits here, if we look again, there's two familiar acronyms there: BDNF, IGF-1. BDNF was brain-derived neurotropic factor. IGF was insulin-like growth factor 1. We can remember from the nutritional presentation that those help with neuronal or brain cell growth and repair. Okay, so we want to improve the release of those as much as we can. So not only can we use supplementation and nutritional aspects, but we can also use physical therapy or physical exercise as well. Helps with neuroplasticity. Everybody who's read Norman Doidge's book is very familiar with neuroplasticity, or the ability of our brain to essentially learn and repair and regrow. So it helps to improve that. It helps to proliferate neuronal stem cells, which are basically baby nerve cells that can blossom into many different types of nerve cells. So if we can have more of those and we have injured ones, those new stem cells can help to repair those. And it helps to decrease neuronal degeneration, or the breakdown of neurons. All pretty awesome benefits, right? And this is just simply by doing sub-threshold exercise. And we get to that point by using a graded assessment protocol. So as an example here, this is from 2010, so a little bit of an older article now, but again, the same person, Leddy, and in the Journal of Clinical Sports Medicine again. So there were 3 groups, and basically what they did is they had one group that was cocooned, or told to, after they had a concussion, told to go sit in a dark room for a couple of weeks, don't go see any friends, don't do any sort of screen time, don't do anything, any activity, nothing. Group number 2 was, once they had an injury, they were told to include exercise into their recovery. Group number 3 was a group that was previously doing exercise. Once they had sustained a concussion, they were then told to include exercise as the recovery in their recovery protocol as well. So the results. So number 1, these patients, the cocoon group, they did not fully recover. They still had deficits up to, I believe, 6 to 12 weeks after the injury. Number 2, they did recover. However, they basically had improvements in motor function and cognition, or movement ability and mental capacity. And number 3, not only recovered, but they also thrived. Okay, so it's important, again, sedentary versus trained brain, you can see there, if you have a concussion, it's fantastic to include physical activity in your recovery process. But you can also have a preventative perspective and exercise even before you've experienced a concussion, and you will still recover, but not only recover, but you will also thrive. So again, this is what we spoke about as far as treatment. So treatment is based on the assessment. It's individualized, right? Not everybody's going to experience symptoms at 150 beats per minute. It's whatever that patient experiences, whatever number they experience it at. And then we include individualized, progressive, sub-threshold aerobic exercise, okay? 80% of that threshold heart rate, 1 time a day for about 20 minutes, and most days of the week if possible. It says cycle or treadmill just because they're a little bit more controlled. Walks or even a stepper have been used as long as the patient can handle it. And you always stop exercise or physical activity if your symptoms become exacerbated. Okay. We want to repeat the assessment protocol every 2 to 3 weeks because the patient should be improving, right? And so if they were in week 1, we did the assessment and their threshold heart rate was 150 beats per minute. We let them exercise for 2 to 3 weeks. We retest them. Maybe the next time we retest them, it's 160 beats per minute, which changes our prescription. And then every 2 to 3 weeks, we do it again, and 170, 180 beats per minute is their threshold, right? Until we get to the point where they actually pass the test, and then we know, hey, physical activity is no longer a exacerbator of symptoms here. And so the patient may have resolved their injury by then, or if they still continue to have symptoms, then we know that they are most likely from another origin, which we have other tests to follow up on and try to figure that out as well. Okay, so just briefly again, we're going to talk about the cervical spine or the neck. Being a chiropractor, I obviously have an intimate relationship or an intimate knowledge of the spine, specifically the neck. I actually work with a sports medical doctor, and he said the most often missed part of a post-concussion assessment is the cervical spine. So we're so caught up in dealing with a lot of the concussion specific signs and symptoms, which rightfully so, that we neglect to look at the cervical spine. Okay. We spoke in webinar 1 again about how the neck or the cervical spine plays a role and how important it is to look at it. So from a rehabilitation perspective, we want to assess and then address the range of motion, okay, improve any sort of range of motion deficits that may have been realized. And then we want to include progressive prescribed exercise, okay, or physical rehabilitation. This helps to promote healing of the structures that are injured, improve muscular strength and endurance, improve stability of the neck, and generally increase the capacity of all the structures, which makes them more resilient to injury. Okay, here's a very, very brief rehab protocol that I have put into place, okay? Again, this should be individualized, specific to the patient, but this is just an example. Typically with this being an in-person seminar that I give, I do these exercises with the patients. So I'm not going to spend too much time on here, but these are exercises that are aimed at improving range of motion while also increasing muscular capacity and endurance. Okay, so we got cervical spine cars or controlled articular rotations, chin tucks, wall angels, doorway chest stretch. So just a very, very simplistic and very basic rehab protocol. Again, that should be individualized, but this is just an example of them. All right, so hopefully that gave you guys an idea on how physical activity can be used in not only assessment, but treatment. Return to work, return to learn, return to play protocols also should involve physical activity assessment as well. That's a whole nother lecture, a whole nother story, but it's just important to know that any sort of decisions made for those areas of work, school, and sport should involve the assessment of a patient from a physical activity perspective as well. Okay, so I see there's a few questions here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop screen sharing and then, okay, so I realize there's going to be some questions that are from the nutritional one first, so let's get to those. Can keto therapeutic eating help with regarding inflammation of the brain as practiced with people with epilepsy, specific to sugar inflammation? That is a great question. Epilepsy is a little bit beyond my scope of practice. And so I think for something like that, especially considering you're going to be changing diets and including a keto diet, it's best to speak to your family health practitioner or a naturopath would have really good insight into something like that. Generally, keto therapeutic eating or the ketogenic diet can help with general inflammation, which would include the brain. There may be specifics for patients with epilepsy that I can't address. And so I think, again, it's important to speak to somebody who has a little bit of a better understanding of that. Bevel has a plant-based product. Would that be good or better? Not 100% sure what that is referring to. Sorry, it was probably brought up at the time of me speaking, so I apologize for that. What amount is a serving for the proteins, beans, and grains? Yeah, so that's a good question. So it changes. It changes depending on the type of food that you're eating, but also your serving may be different than somebody else's serving just based on more specifics as far as your biometrics or like your height, your weight, that kind of thing. You can even Google just general servings and then it may have a number for you. There's typically calculators online that you can input some of your biometrics and then it'll give you what you would need for that. Magnesium and etc. and supplementation, can they be taken at night? When is the best time to be effective? That's always a good question. Timing of nutrients as far as like the daytime, and then also, you know, empty, full stomach, before, after meals, whatever. That's always a bit of a tricky question. I am not familiar with them being more effective at certain times. Obviously, something like melatonin, which is more sleep related, would be best to be taken at night before bed. But as far as the other ones go, it should be fine throughout the day. Again, because this is within my scope, but it's not my focus on my scope. This is probably a better question for a naturopath or a dietitian. They would have a little bit more intimate knowledge on that as far as timing. I missed some of this webinar. Was there anything about foods to avoid and foods that will help for brain injury? Yes. So we spoke about the MIND diet and certain foods that were encouraged and discouraged. The webinar will be broadcast on the BIST website or their BIST YouTube page, so you can check in there, and it should be available in the next week or so. To limit inflammation, follow the suggestions made. What is oxidative stress? If we've been diagnosed with high oxidative stress markers, will following suggestions help? Are there any other strategies one could use to reduce the level? So oxidative stress markers. So oxidative stress is essentially the stress or the potential damage or injury that reactive oxygen species can cause. Okay, so essentially it can break down certain cells in your body, and it can cause, you know, high oxidative stress or high cell damage. Okay, so yes, you do want to limit inflammation because inflammation will proliferate the oxidative stress, but also you want to increase the amount of antioxidants that you're taking. So I mentioned a few of those things like cranberries, strawberries, blueberries, blackberries. Okay, those are all high in antioxidants, and they will help to break down the reactive oxygen species, which contribute to oxidative stress. Any comments on supplements like CoQ10, lion's mane, CBD oil, GABA for PCS? I'm just chuckling because lion's mane, I actually had a patient come in today and tell me that they had just started taking lion's mane and they felt better than ever. So lion's mane is a type of mushroom that has been talked about on a number of different podcasts and different research studies. I will be very upfront with you. I have to do more research on lion's mane myself just because I am not super familiar with it. But anecdotally, I have one patient that has told me he feels great. So CoQ10, yes, has been linked to positive changes in patients with concussion. CoQ10 is it has also been linked to heart health. It's part of what's called the electron transport chain, which is an energy production chain in our body. So that can help with things like fatigue. So yes, that has been shown. CBD oil. So CBD oil is something that is gaining in popularity. lots of, again, short-term anecdotal benefits that have been found, but until there's any long-term studies on that stuff, I can't make any recommendations for that as well. Okay. And GABA, again, has been shown which is gamma aminobutyric acid, has been shown to be beneficial because it works as a neurotransmitter in our brain, so it can help with function in our brain. So it can be, again, a positive supplement to take, like always. And I know I keep harping on this, but it's important that I tell you this: always consult your family doctor or a naturopath or a dietitian that would have a little bit more intimate knowledge on this. I've had PCS for 4 years. My energy seems to get depleted after 60 minutes of activity. I take breaks in between the hour. Doctor called it decompensation. I then get very fatigued and cannot do anything else for the day. So again, a specific question for a specific person, but there is, and I think I saw somebody else talk about this, there is something called exposure therapy, which is essentially exposing our bodies to the stimulus that is causing us to feel certain symptoms. So I do think it is beneficial in certain cases, especially if you have, prolonged and ongoing PCS. It's important to challenge our bodies in a way that they can adapt. Okay, our bodies are very adaptive. We're a very adaptive creature. Okay, and we can be exposed to things and we can overcome things if they are done in a graded manner. Okay, so decompensation, meaning your doctor called it decompensation, that you essentially have taken breaks to the point where your body can't handle any more than the 60 minutes. Okay, so it's important to challenge yourself, and it's not going to be easy because the first little bit you're obviously going to be fatigued, but at a certain point you will become more resilient. Okay, and this is where things like physical activity and physical rehabilitation play a role. Even if it's only for 1 minute, 30 seconds each additional day, right? They build and build and build. So if it's 1 minute a day, after a week, that's 7 more minutes. After 2 weeks, 14, 3 weeks, 21, right? And then all of a sudden you're up to 2 hours, and then your fatigue doesn't affect you as much. So I understand there's more, it's a little bit more complicated than just saying, oh, increase your physical activity, without me knowing the specifics of your case. And this is not the place for that. That's essentially what is meant by decompensation and how to overcome it. There is an event where I can do the activity at the time, however, the symptoms come on afterwards, requiring recovery time. How can one accommodate this consideration? Yeah, this is something we see fairly often. Patients feel okay, at the time, the day of, and oftentimes they will feel the brunt of it the next day, or maybe even the day after. And this is, again, a very common thing. So it's, again, just about assessing the patient where they are at this point in time and providing them with a graded exercise protocol. Okay, it will work to improve your muscular endurance and strength. More importantly, it's not just about muscles, it's just overall capacity, your ability to perform more. So I get it that you may feel not the best the next day, but sometimes those are the days when it's important to work through some of it, to the point of, like I said, the idea of exposure therapy, exposing yourself to working through those tough times. Okay, again, this is not specific advice for your case, but this is an idea that can be used in rehab. Okay, so yeah, it's a little bit of a wishy-washy answer just because it is very specific to a patient. How fast should you cycle regarding the exercise program, 20 minutes per day? So that depends, right? That'll depend on a number of different factors. That'll depend on what target heart rate you're trying to get to. That'll depend on your physical fitness currently, right? If I ask for a Olympic athlete to cycle and get their heart rate up to 120 beats per minute, that is far different than somebody who's very sedentary. And we ask them to get their heart rate up to 120 beats per minute. And that's why we like to use heart rates, because it kind of levels the playing field. I'm not asking you to cycle the same speed as a Olympic cyclist. It is just getting your heart rate up to the same pace as one. Okay. I hope that makes sense. But that's why we use heart rate instead of just a speed. My symptoms often show up after the exercise later in the day. So keeping track of the BPM at which symptoms show up is not always useful. Yeah, I understand that. And so this is why these testing protocols are never used in isolation. So we always look at physical capacity, but we would also look at other areas, things like visual capacity and vestibular or balance capacity, right? Cervical spine, right? So I know the way that I've laid this out, it seems like, oh, we would just do one test, but we have to look at the whole picture of the patient. Okay, so I know symptoms can often be delayed, but there may be another reason for it other than just physical activity, right? So it is useful to keep track of your heart rate, but there may be other things at play as well there. Oh, base cell margarine. Sorry, I alluded to something called bevel earlier. It's base cell margarine. Plant-based, good or not? So I would, again, the Mind diet is specific in what they recommend. Things like butter, plant or grass-fed high-quality butter or olive oils, okay, and avoiding of margarine. That being said, plant-based is most likely better than the standard base cell margarine. At the same time, it is probably not as good as using things like olive oil and grass-fed butter. And that's because of the type of fat it is. Cervical spine issues is overlooked and belittled by so many practitioners. Was told to avoid chiro, but believed the chiro would know best how to deal with the pain instead of physiotherapists. No, what are your thoughts? Do you practice in Toronto? So I practice in Pickering. So this is a question I get a lot of the time. What's the difference between chiropractors and physios? I was told by my doctor to avoid chiropractors. You know, I think like with any profession, there's always good, there's always bad, right? And I always answer the what's the difference question with this. If you have a very good physiotherapist and you have a very good chiropractor, they would be doing a lot of the same things. They'd be treating in a very similar manner, okay? It was always looked at before as chiropractors would do the adjustments or crack your back essentially, and physiotherapists would do exercise. Well, now there's physiotherapists that are certified in doing adjustments or manipulations, and there's chiropractors that do a lot of exercise rehabilitation like me, okay? So I don't think it is, it's not about what profession you go see, it's about who you go see. I don't care if they're a chiropractor, they're a physiotherapist, if they're an athletic therapist, if they're a massage therapist, if they have the knowledge and the wherewithal to treat these types of injuries, they should be doing many of the same things across different professions, okay? Cervical spine issues being overlooked. That is very common. Like I said, my sports MD colleague has told me that himself. Just to bring up a stat from the first webinar, it takes about 70 to 120 G's of force to cause a concussion. Okay, G is the force of gravity. So 70 to 120 times the force of gravity to cause a concussion. It only takes 4.5 G's to cause a whiplash of the neck. So that says with 99.99% of concussion injuries, there will most likely be a whiplash of the neck as well. Okay, so it's silly to avoid that area. It's silly to belittle it because yes, there can be pain and dysfunction at the neck, but it can also cause things like balance issues. It can cause things like headaches. It may influence things like sleep patterns, some of the other things that concussion patients often complain about. So it's very, very, very important to look into the cervical spine or the neck. Right? People that are telling you to avoid chiropractors, I understand there's a little bit of a stigma around chiropractic profession. If you have a good chiropractor, though, new age chiropractor, they're doing very good things now, and the profession has changed a lot, very similar to physiotherapy now, which is looked at as being, more commonplace in mainstream medicine. Okay, we got last two questions here, and then we're gonna wrap up. At UPMC, they told me to deliberately bring on my symptoms. up to 6 out of 10 in my case with noise, and that exposure helped me get better. What do you think about that kind of exposure therapy? So again, that's the exposure to the stimulus there that we talked about. At a certain point, it's important to actually expose yourself to the things that cause some symptoms, because then your body can adapt to them. Again, not without the help of a licensed healthcare practitioner though, because they will know when to expose you to that kind of thing. If my neck cracks a lot, does it mean my muscles are weak? Sorry if it's a silly question. Not a silly question. I get this a lot. So your neck cracking a lot, again, without knowing the specifics of your case, typically the cracking is one of two different things. So it's gas that becomes released from the joints, okay, which is very similar to when you crack your fingers, okay, which is a non-event. It doesn't matter. Or it can be, if it's a repetitive snap or cracking, it can be a muscle or a tendon that is snapping over a structure, okay? If it is non-painful, again, non-event, it just means you have some tight muscles in the neck. If it is painful, it can be something that should be looked at by a healthcare practitioner. As far as it meaning muscle weakness, potentially, but again, you need a practitioner to look at it to be certain there. I'll take one more just because it is a little near and dear to my heart. How do you assess the cervical spine? You go see a good chiropractor, a good physiotherapist. They will assess you, and they should include a few different things very quickly. Range of motion assessment, neurological assessment, including reflexes, strength testing, sensation testing, and special tests, orthopedic testing, palpation or feeling of the structures and muscles in the cervical spine and upper back and shoulders and arms, and then any sort of additional movement-based tests, okay? That forms a well-rounded assessment of the neck, and that can really give you a little bit more information on its involvement. All right, sorry guys, that ran a little bit longer than I wanted. I understand that there's always a good amount of questions for these two topics. Thank you very much for tuning in. Like I said, the information in this webinar can be sent to BIS and then emailed out if you would like. And also, if you want to catch this webinar again, it will be on the BIS website and the BIS YouTube channel in a short little while. Thanks so much for attending. I really enjoy giving this presentation. Hopefully you guys got some good information out of it. And finally, there is one more webinar presentation next Monday done by a colleague of mine, Ayushi, who is an occupational therapist, about pacing, planning, and fatigue management. Really good stuff, so you should tune in then. Alrighty, have a great night. Take care. Thanks again.